Aquesta tarda continuem amb el cicle de conferències sobre la IA i el sector públic. I avui hem convidat una persona que jo personalment tinc moltes ganes de sentir, perquè és el Rony Medaglia, que ha escrit un dels informes que jo trobo que són més encertats sobre l'aplicació de la IA i el sector públic. I will switch to English because Rony will speak in English, but you have the translation in Catalan, so I will try to introduce you. Rony Medaglia is a professor at the Copenhagen Business School at the Department of Digitalization in Denmark. His research focuses on digitalization in the public sector from the perspectives of digital services provision, citizens' engagement, and sustainability. He has published in international journals such as Government Information Quarterly, the Journal of Information Technology, and the Information Systems Journal, and has co-edited the research book on public management and artificial intelligence. So we are there. He has conducted research and teaching on government digitalization in a global context, including research work on digital innovation for the European Commission and the United Nations. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Rony. So the floor is yours. Per tots vosaltres, si teniu preguntes, les podeu posar en el questions and answers que teniu en la vostra pantalla, sisplau. Rony, you can go on, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. I'm very excited to share some of the research I've been working on regarding artificial intelligence in the public sector. So I'm very delighted to hear your comments and questions at the end. As was said before, I'm a professor at the Copenhagen Business School, and the department I work in is called the Department of Digitalization, which is a very multidisciplinary department that includes people with more technical background, with people with more of a policy or management background, such as myself. The type of research that we do spends on all cutting-edge technologies, including blockchain, technology for digital health, the Internet of Things, and of course, artificial intelligence, which is something I would like to share some insights with you about today. Copenhagen Business School is one of the largest universities in Denmark, with a population of around 20,000 students, and we're quite international, both in terms of students and faculty. Copenhagen Business School in the area of digitalization and in the discipline of information systems is the #1 school in Europe, and among the highest also in the world when it comes to research on information systems. I'm originally from Italy. That's where I started doing my research with my PhD in Rome, but I moved in Denmark some 17 years ago. And one of the reasons is because the focus area I have, which is e-government, is very highly developed here in Denmark. If you look at the United Nations biannual survey, Denmark always comes either on top or in the first 5 positions in the ranking. So it's a very stimulating environment to study things such as digital government and obviously artificial intelligence in government. One of the things that I also focus on is the relationship between digitalization and sustainable development. And that's something I will also touch upon later on when we talk about AI. Now, there's 4 things I would like to do today in the time that we have. I plan to speak for a maximum 45 minutes, and then I will leave around 15 minutes for questions and answers later on. So first, I would like to try to answer the question, why is studying AI in the public sector important? Then we'll touch upon something related to the latest news on the development of AI, which is the emergence of generative AI. What's new there? The third thing and the fourth will be focused on empirical research that I've been conducting myself on, also the state of the art of academic research, which is what are the potentials, but what are also the challenges of using AI in the public sector. And then I will share some words on what are competencies that are needed for public servants, such as many of you are, that want to work or already work with AI. So the first question to answer is obviously, why should we talk about this at all? Why is AI in the public sector important? One of the things that I think it's very useful to say is that we are at the top of a hype. This is a photo of something that struck me when I was at the supermarket. Now they even sell toothbrushes claiming that they have artificial intelligence in them. So if we look at the hype cycle of technology, we can really say that we reached the peak in terms of artificial intelligence. Everybody's talking about it. There's a lot of expectations around it. And what we know from previous years of previous waves of new technology is that these hype cycle, they follow a specific shape. So there's a very quick increase in expectations when a new technology comes out. Everybody talks about it. Think about, for instance, some years ago, it was all about blockchain. When it reaches the peak, everybody thinks this technology is going to revolutionize something. It's going to be the cure of all the wrongs that we have in the world. But then what happened is that, interestingly enough, very quickly there's a disillusionment. So if we also consider blockchain as an example, right after this peak of inflated expectation, we have more and more people saying that this was actually bad for the environment. It was risky type of technology that has a huge carbon footprint, for instance. So if we think about AI, I believe that we are passing right the peak of inflated expectation. There's a lot of now talk about some of its downsides, and according to Gartner, this company that every year comes up with the updated hype cycle, generative AI in particular, we can expect it to go through this trough of disillusionment. Over time, fortunately, however, technology reach a balance where we know what they're good for, we know what they're not good for, we don't talk about it so much, we just use it. So there's a lot to expect from now on. So what we want to do is to separate from all these noise and hype and go back to the basics. So what is artificial intelligence? At the core of it, there's this idea of machine learning, which is the ability of machines to improve their performance with no or little human intervention to accomplish the task it's given. So this is a fundamental shift from traditional automation, where in traditional programming, you always had to provide instructions and then the machine would execute these instructions. With machine learning, you're able to just provide input data, and then through algorithms, the input data can be analyzed for patterns and provide some solutions in the form of specific outputs. Now, this has been a revolution in the sense that since we have so much content digitalized on the internet, we're able to feed these algorithms with whatever data we want and create new applications. So for instance, this image of a delicious high-calorie dessert for a computer is nothing but a sequence of pixels, a sequence of zeros and ones. And so with this one, for a human spectator, this is a four-legged mammal that is man's best friend. For a computer, this is also another pattern of pixels. Now, if you give enough of the good quality input data, then machine learning is able to identify patterns and, for instance, very quickly distinguish between which one of these inputs represents a dog and which one of these inputs represents a delicious blueberry muffin. So you see that the potentials for these are exploding by now. If you have inputs as voice recording, for instance, then you can have applications of speech recognition. If you provide historical market data to machine learning algorithms, you're able to create trading bots and so on and so forth. Now, why are the potentials of AI so important when we talk about public sector? Well, if you think about the way public sector works, it's an ideal environment because it's continuously changing with a set of very unforeseeable political variables, institutional variables, economic variables. So it's very hard to automate tasks in a pre-programmed way, which is the traditional automation way. So AI does not operate on an if-then logic of instructions. and therefore it can learn. So when we talk about public sector as a context, we can see that AI really fits in terms of its potentials. Now, AI is not something about the future anymore. I've been working now with the European Commission on studying AI adoption in the public sector for a number of years, starting from 2019. And one of the reports that we came about over the years was a collection of the landscape of the use of AI in the public sector. This report is from a couple of years ago, and it already collected almost 700 cases of actual adoption of AI applications. These are not necessarily pilots, but they're also applications at the higher level of development. You see that among these cases, you have the majority of them already implemented. The situation is evolving, and you can find a link to a database of all cases of AI as we update it following this QR code. Now, the level of government that is mostly interested is the national level, but I see this quickly changing because at local level, there's also starting to become a lot of projects related to AI. And this is due to the availability of more and more quality data that we see. Examples are in very many areas of public sector. So this is from Denmark, the country I live in. In the city of Aarhus, for instance, they are using artificial intelligence to optimize the distribution of drinking water in the city. So they collect data from sensor on the public water grid of the city, and they are able to optimize the distribution based on real-time machine learning analysis of the incoming data. Another very different application, but that follow the same potential of artificial intelligence, is here in the city of Copenhagen, where the input data is audio input from phone calls to the emergency room of a hospital in Copenhagen. Basically, what they're able to do is to anticipate the likelihood of someone calling the emergency, whether they're going to have a stroke, a heart attack, just based on the tone of the voice. This is based on training data of hundreds of thousands of calls, and artificial intelligence has been able to predict with a very high accuracy the extent to which a caller might be about to have a heart attack just from the tone of the voice on the telephone. So, having said that, you might have heard of this word generative AI. In particular, this exploded after November 2022 when we had this commercial diffusion of a new version of ChatGPT, this application developed by OpenAI. So ChatGPT is part of a booming family of generative AI applications that now includes applications from also different competitors, and the last one that you might have heard of coming from China, which is DeepSeek. Now, what do all these all these applications have in common? Well, they differ from traditional AI because their main point is to generate new content, mimicking the patterns in training data. So we have now a distinction between traditional AI, whose goal is to make predictions, for instance, based on the input of phone calls to the hospital emergency room, what is the likelihood of the patient having a heart attack? Or based on behavior of bank transaction of a bank customer, what is the likelihood of the customer to default on their loans? Traditional AI is not focused on creating new content, however. It's just focused on predictions, classifications, or recommendations. For instance, when you are watching Netflix, the recommendation for the next movie is done through machine learning. Generative AI, instead, are applications that can provide with new text based on mimicking patterns of existing training data. That's what ChatGPT does. But also patterns of video or images. This is an application that municipalities in Finland are experimenting with, where they're able to support the design of urban spaces using image generation. So this is a typical example of public sector organizations starting to experiment with the potentials of generative AI as opposed to traditional AI. Now, there's huge potentials and there's huge attention going on here. But what are some of the challenges that sort of have to be taken into account when we talk about AI in the public sector? I can describe this in 7 classes of pitfalls of artificial intelligence based on state-of-the-art of research, case studies that I've been conducting myself. So the first one that many of you might have heard of applies particularly to generative AI and this problem of hallucinations. Already a few years ago, when ChatGPT started being used as a mainstream tool, there was a case in the US where lawyers showed up in court and found out while they were presenting the case defending their client that the legal cases that they were referring to were actually invented. They had to admit later on that they used ChatGPT to find references for their case. And they ended up admitting that they didn't even know that ChatGPT could make up content that is not necessarily true. Now, the reason for this is because generative AI applications are trained to provide a statistical probability of patterns in training data. They're not designed to provide truthful answers. The way a large language model such as ChatGPT works or DeepSeek works is just answering the question, given a sequence of words, what word is likely to come next? So the example here would be if you have the sentence, the cat sat on the mat, if you give enough training data of all texts that have been ever published on the internet, you're able to identify the statistical likelihood of a word following another one position in a text. So the idea that the answers that large language models give are similar to the answers of a search engine is actually wrong, because large language models are basically always providing what most of the time is a statistical approximation for what sounds likely, but it's not necessarily factually true. Actually, it's not a large language model sometimes hallucinate and sometimes respond with the truth. They are technically always hallucinating. It's just that most of the time, the hallucination matches reality. So the awareness of this is key for any application of generative AI, particularly when we talk about public sector. Unfortunately, there's already incidents in public sector. So there has been recently this case where an application of AI has been used by doctors to transcribe the conversations with their patients. And there was a problem because many times the report of the conversation between doctor and patient also included diseases that were never mentioned by the doctor, because the system was trying to fill in the gap of maybe mispronounced words or noise in the room. Another pitfall of AI that needs to be taken into account is what researchers call algorithmic bias. The idea is that every time you have biased data that is distorted, for instance, against a specific part of the population, the output, the recommendation of the AI system will also be biased, sometimes even more. This is a case from a few years ago in the US again, where they tried to use machine learning to try to fix one of the problems that the prison system in the US has, which is overpopulation. So they took data of all prison inmates to try to decide which prisoners would be the safest to put on house arrest instead of keeping in the prison. And they found out very quickly that the recommendations that the system would give were heavily biased against minority, such as African Americans, for instance. And the reason was that the input data was also biased. For instance, there's research that shows that judges tend to be providing harsher sentences to African American people that go in court cases. This also happened in a famous case here in Denmark, where the municipality of Gladsaxe used this system to try to anticipate in which families minors, children, would be at risk based on a number of input data that included socioeconomic status, included zip code, included visits to the healthcare system, and so forth. Unfortunately, it was found that the recommendations given by the system were also biased against specific minorities, and the project had to be canceled. We see that in generative AI, if you try yourself to play around with this, so for instance, this is a case of using Midjourney, which is a generative AI system with images. If you write, for instance, I want to see the photo of an influential person, you will have disproportionately outputs, in this case, for instance, of old white men. Whereas if you write, I want to see a photo of a nurse, you will have a woman. Similarly, if you write, I want to have a picture of an HR manager. Whereas if you ask the system to give you a picture of a CEO, you will have, again, a white man. So this is because data that is used to train this system is biased. So the system doesn't correct automatically for this bias, but actually makes the bias worse. The third pitfall of artificial intelligence is what researchers call algorithmic opacity, where opacity is the opposite of transparency. This is a study I've been involved in some years ago about the use of artificial intelligence in public hospitals in China. So here, the doctors were using an AI system to be supported in making a recommendation for cancer treatment. So the input data would be the individual patient's blood work and clinical condition, together with the state-of-the-art of medical journal publications on cancer. So on paper, the system could perform much better than any doctor, because obviously no human doctor can read all the research articles about cancer that are published every day. So the system would give you most recommended treatments, and it sort of gave quite a lot of insights to the doctors. However, when we went to interview the doctors, some of them said, this is a system with great potential, but we feel that it's like a black box. It's not like carrying out experiments where we can see the process. Because AI is under learning, we don't know what's wrong if it has some problem. In other words, these systems are sort of like a black box where the output might be very useful, but nobody can really explain why that recommendation has been given. Because as we said before, unlike traditional automation, machine learning doesn't follow a procedure that is prescribed in advance. It just learns by trial and error. So not even the developers of these systems many times can explain why a system gives its output. And in the case of public sector, this is critical, because among public sector missions is also to be transparent and to be legitimate, in the sense that it has to be able to explain why a decision is made. Unfortunately, the situation is a little bit discomforting. This is another report that I've been working on for the European Commission, where we try to provide some recommendations on how to develop, uptake AI in European public sector organizations. And this is based on a survey where we asked, among many things, which part of the AI solutions that public organizations are using, it's actually accessible by the public. And as you can see, most of the time, these solutions are not transparent, either the input data, the algorithm itself, or the output data. I take my executive MBA class every year to a study trip, and this is when we went to Silicon Valley, where we visited the Stanford University Human Center Artificial Intelligence. There we were able to be presented with the latest results of their annual report on artificial intelligence in the world. And they measure the transparency of all the foundation models. We see that there are improvements, but if you look at even the top performing large language models, they are not as transparent as one could expect. Another pitfall that AI brings to the table is the one of intellectual property rights. The training data for these systems needs to be very large, of high quality, and come from diverse sources. However, it's many times unclear how these systems, what type of data these systems they collect. So, for instance, this big news that came up some time ago, that the New York Times sued the developers of ChatGPT, OpenAI, because they realized that among the training data that they used for their application included content that was under copyright from New York Times. So it's unclear how this is going to impact the sustainability of these language models. And when we talk about public sector, of course, public sector has to follow the rules of intellectual property. The fifth pitfall that research brings about is the one of environmental impact. This is often overlooked because we know that AI has huge potentials to actually support the achievement of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is in line with the twin transition by the European Commission, where the green transition and the digital transition sort of support each other. The examples I made before are a clear indicator. So what they're doing in the city of Aarhus with the drinking water distribution powered by AI is very much in line with Sustainable Development Goal number 6 about clean water and sanitation. What the city of Copenhagen is doing with the CORE-T system about detecting cardiac arrest is very much in line with Sustainable Development Goal 3 about good health and well-being. However, there's a dark side of it. Research is now showing that, for instance, generating an image with AI can use the energy equivalent of half a smartphone charge. So every time you ask ChatGPT to create an image for you, the servers that need to process that data and the energy that's needed to power them equals to quite a large CO2 emission. It has also been calculated that with this rate of growth of AI, by 2027, the global AI demand may be accountable for the use of water that is 6 times the amount of water the whole of the country of Denmark uses in a year. This is because these data centers create a lot of heat. They need to be cooled down, and that's why you need a lot of water to do that. So we see that there's a push towards making these AI applications more energy efficient. For instance, DeepSeek, the latest model developed in China, is much more energy efficient than ChatGPT, according to many. However, there's always the question that we know from the 19th century with the Jevons paradox that the more you make a technology efficient, actually the more it's going to be used. So overall, there's going to be the risk that increases in efficiency will increase the overall CO2 emissions because more and more people will use these applications. So it's an open question that public sector needs to be aware when they, for instance, procure these systems. The sixth element I would like to quickly share with you is the one of accountability and liability. Here, there's the tragic example of a mother that is suing the developers of a large language model, Character AI, because allegedly her son was using this large language model and engaging into a conversation that related to his own feelings and the difficulties that many teenagers had. And the system, according to this mother, instead of providing reassuring and positive message, just spit out as output some negative input that eventually, according to this mother, led to the suicide of the child. So there are so many incidents in terms of AI going wrong. And the question here is, who's accountable? Because in the coming court case of this tragic incident, obviously the developers of the system will say that they did not instruct the machine learning algorithm to provide those answers that lead to suicide. It's just a training data, and they are not able to control the output. On the other hand, you can always say that from the mother's point of view, that this system shouldn't be commercialized unless we are able to foresee what its outputs are. So the jury is out there, but this is going to be an increasingly relevant issue when we talk about implementation of AI. Last but not least, there's something about the impact on labor, and in particular, exploitation of labor and displacement of labor that can come from AI applications. One of the things that is usually overlooked is the fact that this input of data is not necessarily automatic. There are entire industries that are revolving around manually labeling data to train this algorithm. So in the funny example I showed you before, where you need to distinguish between a muffin and a dog, this is sort of supervised learning, whereby there is automatically input training data, but then humans have to provide feedback to the machine learning algorithm to make it more and more accurate. So this is done in low labor cost countries that with underpaid workers many times that have to spend hours and hours in these repetitive tasks to provide value to these algorithms. There's also the problem of moderating harmful content. There's a lot of provisions for removing, for instance, violent content from the internet or child abuse content from the internet, which is only partially done automatically. Ultimately, there has to be a human on the other side of the service that has to stand and watch hours and hours of violent content in order to label it, and this can have severe psychological impacts. The other labor impact of AI is the one that many consider the most obvious, which is replacing some of the jobs. According to a recent report by Goldman Sachs, 2/3 of all occupation across all industry will be at least partially automated by AI. So what is going to happen in different industries in terms of job loss or tasks that are redundant? The jury is out there on how this is going to impact labor markets, both in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. Now, this brings us to the most important question. Then, given these challenges, what competences do we need to work with AI? The situation, again, it's a little bit dire because we ask in this report for the European Commission what level of digital literacy is already present in public sector organizations. And unfortunately, it's still quite low, both regarding employees using AI systems and in-house expertise. The other thing to take into account is that the frontier between tasks that can be automated with AI and tasks that cannot be automated with AI, it's not linear. It's not so simple to say, AI is good at this, but it's very bad, for instance, at creative thinking. It's good at doing arithmetic, but it's not good at solving creative problems. Actually, this study shows that, on the contrary, many times the frontier between what's possible and what's not possible is jagged. It's not linear. So, for instance, generative AI applications such as ChatGPT are not very good at doing simple mathematics. They make a lot of mistakes. Humans are still better at that in many cases. Whereas they made an experiment where they asked consultants to come up with new product ideas for marketing, and they compared it with what ChatGPT would do, and the ideas have been judged by human judges as more innovative, more groundbreaking when they were created by ChatGPT. So we still need to learn these jagged frontier, and this is going to be a challenge from now on, that we can also identify, we can only identify with trial and error. Another thing that this brings is, how do we divide then tasks that should be done by AI and tasks that should be done by humans? There's different models here. One way to look at it is to compare centaurs as a model, where you divide a task where some of the tasks the humans are best at, and they're going always to focus on those, and some others you delegate it to these AI applications. The other model is the one of cyborgs, where the two actors are intertwined. So, for instance, you can think of a team of workers working together with ChatGPT, where they brainstorm about an idea, then they bring it to the large language model, then they see what the feedback is, and then they bring it back to the human team. So it's sort of, you have an intertwined role between the two. What we're trying to find now is a scientifically and empirically based way to understand what are competencies needed for AI in the public sector. And this is the focus of our latest report for the European Commission. Based on a number of interviews, surveys, workshops, and analysis of the state of the art of the literature, we identify 3 levels of competencies. Attitudinal competencies, which is about knowing why something should be done. Operational competencies, which is about knowing how things should be done with AI. And literacy competencies, so knowing what AI is and how it works. These 3 levels go across 3 areas: competencies related to technology, competencies related to management, and competencies related to policy, legal, and ethical issues. In the report, you will be able to see the full-fledged sources for this, which include 7 case studies that we had in different member states. And you will see all the details about the specific competencies that are described there. I will give you some examples. For instance, one of the key competencies that, according to us, public servants that work with AI need to have is understanding the fundamentals of, for instance, natural language processing. This is based on what many things were told by our interviewees, which are the fact that you need to understand why a large language model is answering wrong. If you don't understand how a large language model works, you think that will take over the world. But as we said before, it's just a statistical prediction of the next word. It doesn't have a mind. It doesn't have a conscience. The next area that we focused on is the management area. Here, for instance, cross-team collaboration, we foresee this as a competency that will become more and more important, because technical people usually don't work with the management people and the other way around. In the words of one of our interviewees, they say, we need some people that can understand the organization's problems. The technicians are not very good at that. They need to go into a dialogue with other departments. Lastly, I want to give you an example of policy, legal, and ethical competency. For instance, one of the key competency here is literacy in AI procurement. IT vendor companies are very powerful and knowledgeable. So we need to understand and be critical towards these companies so that someone in the public organization can actually technically compare what they're offering to someone else. Now, all these competencies are very important, but how do we operationalize this? How do we transform them into a tool that can be used by public organizations? And how do we make sure that these tools are cross-disciplinary, that they're not just a list of things that would be nice to have, but that are impossible to realize in one person? And how do we customize it? Because public organizations are very different in different countries at different levels, for instance. So in order to do that, we developed what we call the AI for Gov canvas. So it's basically a canvas where you have these 3 levels of operational, governance, and meta competencies in 3 dimensions of technology, management, policy, legal, and ethical. And we populated each of those based on their level of importance, as based on a survey that we have done, and also on the difficulty to access those. So here is just an example where the competencies that are in red are the ones that are most difficult to obtain according to our interviewees, whereas the ones in green are the ones that are easiest to obtain. And the ones that we see here are the 3 most important competencies according to all our survey respondents. So based on this canvas, we were able to develop some personas. So profiles of public servants that are able to master more of these competencies in a realistic way. So for instance, the AI for Gov canvas allows you to bring together a profile persona that we call the techno steward. So the techno steward is someone that's very strong on the technical part, but they also have a managerial mindset where they can ensure that these AI systems are implemented in an ethical and socially responsible manner. You're able to create this persona by bringing together each of these competencies that has each of them a weight in terms of importance or and also difficulty to obtain, so that you cannot put together competencies that are too difficult to obtain over a certain level, so that you're able to ensure that that profile is realistic to obtain in the existing market. Another example that we have is what we call the policy sentinel. So policy sentinel is a persona that is expert in policy development, but also have an understanding of navigating the regulatory landscape. So has some key expertise such as AI procurement literacy, but is also able to combine them with user centricity and capabilities of data collection. Now, the use case for this type of tool are for helping companies, public organizations recruit. They're also good. It's a good tool for performance evaluation, self-assessment, benchmarking, and reporting. And this is part of a master's in artificial intelligence for public service that now has been running for 3 years. And it's part of some of these actions that the European Commission has been putting forward for many years now, together with the other initiative of the Public Sector Tech Watch, which is monitoring and disseminating best practices about emerging technologies in the public sector in Europe. I encourage you to peruse these sources, which are always evolving over time. So this sort of wraps up what I wanted to share with you more as a conversation started about why I think AI in the public sector is important, what's new about generative AI, what are potentials but also challenges of AI, and what are competencies that we need to build to work with AI in the public sector successfully. The idea here is always that technology is not a silver bullet. I like to quote this sentence from Westerman from the MIT that says, when you do digital transformation right, it's like transforming a caterpillar into a butterfly. But if you don't do it right, all you have is just a really fast caterpillar, meaning you keep doing things wrong, just cheaper and faster in the best case scenario. So I look forward to engaging in a discussion with you. And again, thank you very much for inviting me and being able to share some of these things with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rony. It has been impressive. With this broad of examples and so we have 400 people connected, and now we have some questions in the chat of questions and answers. Do you see the chat? Yeah.
I do see it, yes.
Yeah, you have one of the questions which is in English that says, Manuel Arias, that said, can the limit of the use of AI be calculated in relation to the limit of resources, water and energy on Earth, which are finite and which must be shared with other human activities that also consume the same resources, like lighting, air conditioners, transportation, water supply? So that's a very big question.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think the good news is that tech vendors are becoming increasingly aware of this. So it will not be completely on the burden of the public sector organization to establish metrics for identifying, for instance, carbon footprint of the application they use. The vendors themselves now, together with the tech product and service, they also provide many times metrics on sustainability impacts. So what's going to be important is to have procuring capabilities inside public sector organizations that are able to read these metrics and they're able to compare and contrast between different suppliers. But I see more and more attention to this from the vendors, and it will become a source of competitive advantage among them. So that's good news.
So the second question related with that is anyone working on this issue to establish a viable use context for AI for human beings? That's another big question.
Come again? I think I didn't understand the first part.
Is anyone working on this issue to establish a viable use context for AI for human beings? I think that it means, sorry.
It's quite a wide field. So what I can say is something about public sector specifically, and there's a lot of research ongoing on this and a lot of researchers that are focusing on. We had a first wave of research which was more speculative in nature, of just identifying potentials and challenges in a more abstract way. But the more data we have about concrete plans and concrete projects, the more research is coming out. So I would happy to share some references, but there is a lot going on in this field related to how we can use AI in the public sector. Absolutely.
Okay, we have another one, which is Jordi Ruiz, which is related with the first one more or less, that says, taking into account the ecological cost that from AI, do you believe that we have to limit the use of AI for the population or not?
Yeah, I think limiting in itself, it's I think not just futile, but also impossible to enforce. I think the key is in educating the public on how AI works and which cases AI is necessary. So I see, for instance, in my teaching activity that many times students now use large language models such as ChatGPT the same way they would use Google, just as a search engine. So this is not only makes them vulnerable to the problem of hallucinations that I was telling about, but it's also much more energy consuming than a traditional Google search. So when you don't really need and you don't really have additional value of AI, then you shouldn't use it. As a rule of thumb, I always say that regardless of the organization or the individual use, you start with the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And then based on that, you choose the right tool and not the other way around. We see, unfortunately, that now there's so much hype about AI that everybody asks themselves, how can we use AI? And then they look for a problem, whereas it should be the other way around.
That the one is connected with the data protection law that says how we can combine the AI with the data protection law and the public administration.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So one of the pitfalls I haven't focused on because it's already covered in previous ways of digitalization is how to preserve privacy. I think in that case, it's good that we are in the EU environment where we have quite well established best practices for working with GDPR. And in that sense, compliance with GDPR for AI systems it's basically going to face the same challenges as we had it in previous waves of digitalization. I think what's important to show is now from a user point of view, for instance, employees that use ChatGPT in their work need to be aware that they need to use licensed copies of ChatGPT that will not use their queries as training data for the algorithm, so that the data doesn't leave the safe boundaries of the organization. So in that sense, I think there should be a particular attention given.
Yeah, that's connected with another one, what says if there is a conflict in the use of AI and of course data protection, but of course confidentiality and the author rights. I mean, so there are three things at the same time. But what do you think? She asked, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I totally agree that this is going to be a challenge. To me, this requires an awareness and a strategical thinking for each public sector organization, because what's new in this new wave of generative AI is the fact that it's being used by employees before the organization realizes. There's a lot of shadow use where the organization top management is not aware of how much and how their employees are using generative AI already now. And when you have these uncontrolled use, you have much more risks of data leaks, of unethical uses, and overall of less effective use. So I think now is a key moment to create awareness at the organizational level so that we can exchange best practices instead of just not being aware of what is going on. I always say every time I go in a public organization and I ask how many of you use ChatGPT, 5 people will say yes, the other 5 are lying.
Yeah, there is another question that is quite important that says if you know any report about the substitution of people in the public administration. So the impact of AI in the public labor, I mean.
Yeah, beyond what I showed in the slides before, which was not specifically focusing on public sector, but what including government among different industrial areas, it was showing that there is quite a lot of potential for labor substitution, or at least substitution of some tasks. I know that, for instance, here in Denmark, the government at the beginning of this year has provided a new task force with the objective to identify how many man hours can be replaced across all the public sector in the whole of the country by this summer, I think, in a new report. So there's a lot of policy attention. Data is still not so easily available because it's a quickly developing environment. But I think there's going to be more and more focus on this, and also more and more upcoming data on the real job impact on the public sector from AI.
So I have left a final question because I think that it's important, that says, how do you recommend how we can start that?
Yes. So I think the first thing to do would be to create awareness. So establish workshops, webinars like this are very relevant. There's also make use of the opportunities there are from the European Commission. So I put the link to the AI for Gov Master, which is a great opportunity for some parts of your public organizations to be exposed to the state of the art of best practices of AI and also learn from each other. There's a lot of small experiments going on in different local authorities, for instance, across Europe, but they just don't know about each other. Use the concept of sandboxing, whereby you can experiment in a control environment first and then learn from what works and what doesn't, and then try to expand it at the whole organization level. Of course, there's a lot of risk aversion, especially in the public sector. You don't want to breach GDPR and whatnot, but I think it's worth doing and it's necessary to experiment, because otherwise we have the danger of missing this train for Europe as a whole, and also missing citizen demand, because citizens are becoming more and more used to AI-empowered service in commercial services. So there will be a stronger and stronger pressure for public services.
We have a last-minute question, which says, most Catalan universities are still not publishing policies for professors and students, and it affects assessment a lot. Are there universities in Europe with clear policies stated? I mean, there are universities that has, let's say, relevant policies for that, how to publish, which are the recommendations, and so on.
So you're talking about research in university that...
Yeah, I think that he's asking about how to use AI, or how to publish with AI or something like this.
Oh, so how to use AI
Yeah.
researcher and
Yeah.
also in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So in the classroom, we had at the beginning the classic negative reaction. So for instance, in this school, we had a period where using ChatGPT, for instance, was completely banned in exams. But then over time, obviously, we realized that not only students should be able to use a ChatGPT, but they must use it because they need to learn the skills that they will be expected to do when they go in the job market, because we're not going back. There's no situation where there will be jobs in which you will not use AI. You will use AI in any jobs. So in that sense, now we're formulating ways to embed AI in the classroom and use its advantages for learning. From a research point of view, it's a similar situation. At the beginning, these AI systems were just seen as a way to doing research ethically wrong, similar to plagiarism or cheating the system. But now we see that with some shared guidelines, AI can actually support especially social science research, which is what I'm working with. But the specific ways in which this is going to happen is still developing. So I don't know about many universities that have guidelines for how to use it in research. I think the scientific journals are more ahead on this, and they're starting to publish editorials and guidelines on how to use AI for research.
Okay, yeah, a last question, and we end with that, is about if you know any tools to manage the hate speech in territories. So something to monitorize the social cohesion. I mean, if you know any tools or platforms, or how to detect, how to monitorize, how to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately not. That's not a research area that I focus on. I know there are people that are specialized in this, and I'm sure they will be able to point you to some specific tools. I know that there's a big market for that is used for counteracting hate speech, but unfortunately I wouldn't be able to point you to any specific one.
Okay, so Rony, thank you very much. It has been a really very good seminar. We will have another one the 15 of May, el 15 de maig, a les 16 hores, amb la Clara Velasco. So thank you very much to all of you, and thank you, Rony, for being here with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
A pleasure.